So welcome to Repicture, and today we're excited to talk about structural engineering careers. We have with us Jameelah Muhammad Ingram, and she is a structural engineer that we're excited to talk to, so welcome.
Thank you, Lynn. I'm glad to be here.
Great. So we can just start with just structural engineering. There are just so many different parts of structural engineering. Can you just kind of first of all talk about the different specialties within structural engineering?
Sure, there are many specialties of structural engineering like bridges, buildings, tunnels, and aerospace structures such as planes and space shuttles. Some structural engineers even design amusement park rides, large-scale art sculptures, and even stage design for theatrical productions. Every specialty has its nuance, but the physics is the same.
I love that. And I want to eventually have to get someone who's designing roller coasters to come talk about that, because that's going to be a lot of fun. But what specialty are you in structural engineering?
Well, I specialize in bridges.
So how did you decide to become a bridge engineer?
When I was in 8th grade, I took a class at the Art Institute of Chicago, and we went on an architectural walk. So at first I thought, oh wow, architecture combines the math and the art that I love. Besides, my mother was an artist, my father was a math professor and also a technical professional in the US Navy. My Aunt Jimmy worked with an architect to design her own home. So I went off to high school thinking that I'd become an architect. But that's when I met my AP physics teacher, Mr. Lawrence. And he said to me, Jameelah, do you know the difference between an architect and an engineer? An engineer makes buildings that stand. So I certainly appreciate both professions, but what I later understood is that, an engineer gets to learn the technical aspects behind structures. So I went on to Princeton University, where I majored in civil engineering. I focused on structural engineering, and I also concentrated in architecture. So enter Professor David Billington. He was a scholar who spoke of the elegance, efficiency, and economy in bridge design. And then I interned at an engineering firm in Japan, and we went to visit the Akashi Kaikyo Ohashi, the longest suspension bridge in the world. So thereafter, I went on to Georgia Tech. I majored or got my master's, in structural engineering. And then I returned back to where I began in Chicago to work as a bridge engineer.
That is a great story. Thank you. I love so many components of it. One is you figured out the difference between architecture and structural engineering, because I think a lot of kids, for whatever reason, think that it's just architects, involved in buildings. Is like you said, the important part of you want your building to stand, which is an engineer. And then I love that you went to Japan for internship. We're going to have to do another webinar just to talk about that. That could have been incredible experience.
Well, they do call engineering the stealth profession, so it's nice to know that we're here.
Yep, and I'm doing important things. So thanks for that. And I'm going to ask you kind of may sound like a silly question, but just what do bridge engineers actually do?
Bridge engineers create connections for people to go where they need to go. A bridge engineer can design a new bridge, they can modify or rehabilitate an existing bridge, or they can inspect bridges. Usually they start out by working with the team, and depending on the phase of the project, they will understand the bridge type and location, and then they'll calculate the loads that the bridge will have to carry. Then they'll determine the size of the members required to carry those loads. Bridge engineers also write technical reports, and they develop drawings.
It's a lot of important stuff there they do. And why do you like bridge engineering?
I like bridge engineering because it has a mystique about it, yet it's so practical. There's something magical about spanning across large distances. Bridges also have fascinating history, and they last for decades. Also, at the heart of it all is people. bridge engineers help people to reach their destinations safely and conveniently.
I love that. I love talking about the people aspect of it because that is the important part of what you all do. So I'm curious, as a bridge engineer, like what do you actually do on a typical day? Maybe when you first started your job versus now that you have more experience. What's the typical workday like?
I love to start my day with a cup of hot tea and honey when possible. I like to look at the tasks that I have before me. Now, when I first started, I supported a national bridge inspection program. And so I would put on all of my personal protective equipment and head out with a team to inspect a bridge from a barge. I would also conduct analytical tasks in the office, such as bridge load ratings or calculations for the modification of a bridge. I also worked on CAD drawings and new bridge designs, particularly bridge decks. Now, as I gained experience, I began to lead bridge inspections. I also began to work on more complex designs, such as precious concrete girders for a new pedestrian bridge or drilled shafts. I also started to work more in business development, and that involved preparing responses to a client's request for a proposal, really all in an effort to help the firm to win work. And I can also say that my bridge engineering background has helped in other types of projects, like a new transit project that I'm working on now.
Yeah, so you can use it really for a lot of different areas, not just for designing the bridges.
Yes.
So have you traveled a lot for your, I know you went to Japan, but other than Japan, have you traveled a lot for work?
You know, bridges are all over the world, so a bridge engineer has the option to travel a lot. I certainly did with my internship. And, you know, I started my career in Chicago, and now I work in the Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia area. So it's definitely a possibility to travel. I will also say that there are several volunteer opportunities to build bridges through humanitarian organizations. Now, on the other hand, it is certainly possible to stay local and serve the needs in your local community. And while there, you can actually, you know, because of the internet, you can work on a project that's across the world right at home.
So what has been your favorite project?
My favorite project was the modification of a double-deck, double-leaf bascule bridge. It was located in my hometown of Chicago, near Lake Michigan and over the Chicago River. I served as a project engineer and project coordinator. The scope of the project involved widening the existing sidewalk for pedestrians and bicyclists, and we were only widening it on one side. That is what presented a unique challenge because a basketball bridge, its function relies heavily on it being balanced. Also, we plan to go through the existing historic movable bridge towers. So that added another challenge to this. I also became involved in this project in the earlier stages. So you had a real opportunity to get creative, and it wasn't just plug and chug.
No, that's interesting. And say that type of bridge, because you're putting a pedestrian trail on just one side of it, it messes up that balance, which I hadn't really thought about as being an issue with bridges. So that's interesting.
Well, you just have to consider that in the loading because, you know, a bascule bridge has a trunnion or pivot point in which there's a counterweight on one side and the leaf is on the other. And this particular bridge is, you know, it was double deck and lots of traffic and, you know, pedestrians.
Yeah, and like you said, historic also, which has got to make it added challenge. Which kind of brings me to your education and talk about your schooling. So I'm just wondering, you know, the classes that you took, what have you found to be the most useful classes that you took?
Mechanics of solids, structural analysis, and steel design were probably the most useful structures courses that I took. Mechanics of solids deals with the deformations of solids. And you learn equilibrium equations and free body diagrams. And then with structural analysis, you take a deeper dive into how the structure reacts to forces, and you may even learn software programs to analyze structures. With steel design, you learn how a material functions when it's designed with steel and all of the properties of steel. And you get very familiar with the American Institute of Steel Construction Manual.
That's great. So these technical classes obviously are really, really important. How about kind of what other skills, in addition, you had the classes that kind of get you the technical know-how. What skills do you think have been most important to your career?
Well, the analytical skills, of course, they come from taking the technical courses, but the communication skills. And when I say communication, I mean listening, writing, and presenting in public settings. Those are all very crucial to an engineer's career.
Okay. And when you look back at your college career or college time, are there any classes or anything you wish you had done differently in college?
I would have taken a theater course in improvisation or maybe joined a debate team. Both of those would have come in handy for meeting settings.
I love that. Like you said, communication is so important. So taking maybe some of those classes to help with that aspect, it's a great suggestion. So I know you went to Princeton, you got undergraduate in Princeton, and then went on to get your master's in civil engineering. How important do you think it is if someone wants to get into bridge engineering? How important do you think it is for them to get their master's?
I think that a master's degree is very important because it helps you to solidify the things that you learned in undergrad. It's also one of your first steps into specialization. On top of that, it can help you to attain a higher salary when you start work. Now, if you don't want to go straight through, some companies actually offer assistance with paying for your master's degree.
And talking about that first job, how did you find your first job?
I found my first job through a career fair, actually the National Society of Black Engineers. I would also note that it really started with my resume. I learned the principles of resume writing early on, and it's such a living, breathing document that you have to continuously update. And so once you nail down resume writing and how to best present yourself on paper, then finding a job is not as difficult.
Yeah, and I love that advice that a resume really is a living document. I think too many people do their resume and they never change it based on the job that they're applying for. So that's great advice. Another thing is as we know, networking is so important to get in the job. You kind of got it through your the society career fair. But if a student wants to go into bridge engineering, what type of networking do you suggest that they do?
The American Society of Civil Engineers, Structural Engineering Institute, or structural group in your area is a great way to meet structural engineers. I became involved in the Illinois section when I first graduated from school. I worked on a scholarship committee and eventually, over time, became chair. Now I work with the National Capital section of the American Society of Civil Engineers. I volunteer with a group of professionals to organize professional development events and student outreach events. They are really great ways to meet fellow engineers, students, and clients.
Yeah, those are great associations you talked about, and so important that you actually volunteer and are active in these groups. I mean, not just showing up to meetings, but actually being very active. So that's great advice. And so one of the questions I've gotten from a lot of students that are starting to look for jobs, and luckily with the economy, there are a lot of opportunities out there. Do you have any advice for them as far as how do they decide what job or what company they should apply to?
I'd say start by identifying your personal goals and interests. What tasks do you enjoy? What tasks do you only find tolerable. Also, I'd say to research the organization. What types of projects have they worked on in the past? Who are their clients? What types of projects are their clients sending out requests for proposals for? Because those are the projects that you will probably have an opportunity to work on.
That's great advice. And is there any other advice that you would give to someone who's just starting to look for their first job?
Location. Be sure to consider location in your job search. Oftentimes, a company may have offices all over the world, but sometimes they focus on their local region for projects. Also, the type of bridge project that you work on will depend on the surrounding environment. For example, if you're in California, you'll need to consider seismic activity in your bridge designs. In Washington, D.C., historical plans and aesthetics are critical in bridge designs. I'll also say that attaining your EIT or taking your Fundamentals of Engineering exam is very important while you're still in school. That way, when you start work, you can focus on the path to professional engineering licensure.
So it's great advice. I hadn't really thought about the fact that in different parts of the country, the technical work of bridge engineers will be different. And I also definitely agree with the idea of taking your FE exam in school. I mean, it's just so important to get that done. And often people say, well, do it after school, and then they never get around to it, or it impacts that first job. So great advice. And the last question is, looking back at the beginning of your career, is there anything you wish you had known at the beginning of your career?
Yes, I'd say plan your route, but embrace the detours. I never thought I'd live and work in Washington, D.C. I went to recruit at a career fair with my engineering company in Toronto, Canada, and I met my husband, Jesse. He's from Washington, D.C. And so now I live and work in this area, and I work on bridge and transit projects on the East Coast. Another piece of advice I'll add is to be kind, even in the face of adversity. Champion the civility in civil engineering. And lastly, I'll add, reach back and encourage others to pursue careers in engineering and civil engineering in particular. You never know who could be inspired no matter where you are in your journey.
So thank you so much for your time. You did a great job explaining about civil engineering and specifically bridge engineering, so I appreciate that. I love your advice for us all to embrace the civility in civil engineering. So thank you for your time. And for those listening, if there are other engineering disciplines that you'd like to get more information about, just email us at info@repicture.com. And again, thank you for your time.
Thank you. This has been wonderful.